I would like to introduce our next panelist. Here we're talking about protection. This is not as sexy or as exciting of a topic as you hear in most conferences, homeownership, seminars, panels, but this is probably the thing I'm most excited about personally, because especially in the Black community, I don't think there's enough conversations about the future, about protecting our assets, and not necessarily passing on to the next generation if that's not your thing, but making things smoother for whatever transition happens. So this panel I'm super excited about. We got two legal experts up here with us. I've got Miss Evelyn Miller from Smart Settlements. Evelyn, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me today, guys. So I am one of the owners of Smart Settlements. We're a title company in the DMV. We also service Florida. And I'm just really happy to be here to talk to you guys about protecting your assets, protecting your real property, different strategies that can really put you ahead of the game in that way. I think a lot of people think sometimes that you have to be wealthy to plan for your assets and plan for your estate. And you don't. You really don't. There are a lot of things that you can do that are very inexpensive. It's just about being smart and thinking ahead.
Being smart. Catch that?
Smart.
Good job.
Hashtag smart.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Please give it up for Evelyn. Give it up for Evelyn real quick. And next up, Meredith Hill of Meredith Hill Law Group. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Meredith Hill. I am the owner and principal attorney of the Hill Law Group. We are an estate planning and administration firm located in Bethesda, Maryland, and we service clients in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And I have to second what Evelyn just said about you don't have to be wealthy to make a plan. Everybody should have a plan because life happens, and we all experienced that in 2020. So it's good to have a plan in place.
One of the most tangible benefits of privilege is a roadmap, right? To know what to do, to know how to navigate, to have a backup plan, to have other things in place. So again, I'm so excited about this conversation because this conversation specifically is what a lot of our higher net generational worth folks have been thinking about, is just ingrained in them anyway. And guess what? Today, we're gonna ingrain this in everybody here. So we're gonna be able to pass this knowledge on moving forward. Does that sound good? All right, Evelyn, let's get started with you. At the time of purchase, could you tell us what are the top 3 things that people need to do to think about with protecting their assets?
Sure. So I see that you're trying to put me in a box with this top 3 things, Harrison.
Time.
So I'm going to freestyle a little bit with this because I think that one of the main things you want to think about is how you're taking title to property, okay? So how you're actually going to hold your ownership in the property. And then under that are a number of different considerations that you need to keep in mind. So one of those things is the use of the property, right? Is this your home? Is this your principal residence? Is this an investment property? Is this something that you're buying with business partners? Like, what exactly are your plans for the use of the property? And then kind of a step further than that, with that use, do you envision yourself needing financing? Like, are you purchasing with financing? There are different ways of taking title. So for example, if you are purchasing an asset as an investment and you decide that you want to own it as a company, okay? So maybe this is a very smart way actually of holding title to a property that you're going to use as a rental, okay? Because you want to limit your liability and you want to own it as business. So that it makes a lot of sense. However, if you're going to own a property as a company, you're going to be limiting the type of financing you can do for that property. So are you a cash buyer? Do you need financing? There are a lot more available financing options when you take title as an individual or even as a trust. So those are the type of things that you really want to think about up front, because transferring title after you own a property can be very expensive, okay? This is one of the reasons why you want to talk to a professional about this in advance and even before you purchase. As Harrison knows, there's this thing called transfer and recordation tax. And in most jurisdictions, transferring into a company is going to be a taxable event. So I've seen many people who bought an investment property as an individual. It made a lot of sense at the time. A year later, they're like, start thinking about liability, about business structure. And that's when they realize that actually they want to own it in a company name. Very expensive in certain jurisdictions to do that transfer. Sometimes so expensive that it's not worth it. So it's the kind of thing you really want to think about before you even purchase. So that's why this is a very good question. Like, what do you think about at the very beginning of even before you buy? Another thing you want to think about is family planning. And actually, you can probably speak to this a lot too, but There are quick and dirty ways that you can plan for your heirs when you're purchasing property. So just taking title with your spouse, for example, is estate planning. If one of you passes away, you can make it to where the other one will automatically, by operation of law, become the sole owner of the property. So that alone, just thinking of like, who do you want to be the owner of this property if something happens to you, is something that you can deal with just when you're purchasing the property. There's no additional cost to deciding the proper tenancy when you're taking title.
Love it. So 2 important things she said I don't want to gloss over. Every time there's a transfer, quite often that's a taxable event. What do we mean? Whatever jurisdiction is going to get you with a goodbye tax and a welcome tax every time. So if you're thinking in advance, how can you protect yourself from saving a little money long term? And planting the seed for future, Evelyn, talking about families, elders, and adding folks as a thing. So just, if I don't forget, come back to it. Meredith, when we're thinking about long-term protection and around the transfer of property, what are some things that people need to do to protect that ownership once they're in the house?
So yeah, I would first piggyback off of what Evelyn just said about making a plan of how you want to transfer the property once you are in the property. And if you want to give that to your heirs, how does that look like? If you want your significant other to have it, whether you are married or not married. Because I do have a lot of clients that are not married that have purchased a home together. And if one of them were to pass away, they don't have a plan. Well, they have a plan now because they have me. But if they don't have me, they don't have a plan. And that surviving partner is out of luck. And that happens quite frequently. So my advice would be to think about what you want to have happen and write it down. And speak with a professional attorney to make a plan for you, whether that be creating a will or putting your property into a trust, and making sure that your deeds are written properly. Sometimes, very frequently, especially with the older generations, as people have passed away, they haven't really updated the deeds that much, and it can just cause a headache in future, or headaches and troubles for the younger generation. So just make sure your deeds are properly written by a licensed professional. And I get a lot of questions about, well, why can't I use LegalZoom? This is not a place where you want to cut corners. You've already invested a lot of money in purchasing this property, so you need to invest in keeping the property, whether it's in the family or passing it on to someone else. So to answer your question, Harrison, just make a plan and have it written down by a professional.
If I can just piggyback on that a little bit, because you've brought up the idea of family members preparing their own deeds. And I have seen some really scary consequences to family members doing that, like serious title problems when people decide that they're going to just kind of play lawyer on the weekend or something. It's not worth it. And there can be really devastating results to people misdrafting documents like that. So I would highly recommend speaking to a professional when you're thinking of removing someone from title, adding someone to title. We see probably the most title issues when we see intra-family transfers that have been done without proper legal supervision of that. So I would really echo that. It's super important. I mean, for most people, this is the most expensive thing that you own. Doing proper documentation, it could literally just cost you a couple $100s if there's no transfer and rec tax. And that's another thing. Having a professional do it will help you to minimize taxes. So we know what statute we need to add to your documents to make sure that it's not taxable, or that we're minimizing things, or that you're still going to get your homestead deduction or your your senior citizen deduction or something like that. So there are levels to preparing these documents, and it's truly not a very expensive thing to talk to a professional about it.
I want to jump in again. With that,
I'm good. Y'all know this. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Sorry, it's good to do all of this on the front end. And yes, it is an investment, but it's going to cost you 10 times more if you mess it up and you had your cousin try to prepare your deed on the weekend. It's going to mess up, and you're going to pay 10 times over, and you're going to have to pay for a lawyer to clean it up. You're going to have to pay for court, and court's expensive. I recently had someone come to me. She her mother just passed away. She thought her name was on the deed with her mom, and she wanted to sell the house. Turns out her name was not on the deed. It was her mom and some other random person. So now we got to find this random person, see if they're dead or alive, and figure out that mess. And that's going to cost her way more money than if they had just had the deed done correctly and the mom had written a will or a trust. So do the work on the front end, because it saves you a lot of time and money and heartache on the back end.
Something else they're not saying is that nothing is more local than real estate law. Nothing is more local than real estate law. So if you got cousin Johnny in Louisiana, sorry if anyone's from Louisiana, that says, oh, I can help you out. I do real estate down here. And they're gonna look at it, even if they're gonna give you a good price, it's not a good price because of what can come up. So can you talk really quickly about the importance of local and how different things are in every place? Just 2 seconds about that.
Yeah, you want to have someone that this is their actual practice of law, and this is where they practice in the jurisdiction every day. You don't want to go to someone that does bankruptcy, family law, personal injury, and then drafts deeds on the side as well. They don't know what they're doing. So I would highly recommend that you find someone that this is their bread and butter, and that this is what they do day in and day out, and they practice in this specific area, because they will know that jurisdiction, and they will know, like, for example, like Evelyn mentioned, the recordation taxes and all of that. We know the different exemption codes that may be applicable to that situation, so you don't have to pay the recordation tax, because the court's not going to tell you that. So it's important that you have someone that's local instead of your cousin Johnny in Louisiana, because Johnny's not going to know. Johnny's might know Louisiana law, again, if he's an attorney, but I would just recommend making sure that you have someone local.
Penny wise, pound foolish.
Yeah, also even just within, even attorneys who are local, but it's not their practice area. I have attorneys who are in this jurisdiction, but they practice in other areas of law. You know, it's like if you were a heart surgeon, you don't go do brain surgery, like you go and you send your patient to the brain surgeon when it's time. So, other attorneys will be working on a family law matter, and then there's a deed that needs to happen, or they need a title examination in preparation for what they're going to do with property division, and they will reach out to us for that. So even the professionals know, a real professional will know that this is not something that you should, where you should cross those lines. Super important.
Again, the power of privilege is having somebody in your family that does this, or your friend, or your cousin, or someone went to law school. Not everybody had that originally, but guess what? After today, you got it, okay? We have the resource here in front of you that is here available to help you invest a little bit more upfront, right? Don't seek out that cheapest option, especially with any legal documents, because you will pay at some point. Right, ladies? Is that correct?
Yes, you will.
All right, back to your point before, in the last organized question before you give us some open thoughts. For family properties, elder relatives, there's a lot of wealth lost in the Black community, specifically with the transfer of property between older folks. What are some tips or actionable things that the folks in this room can do to talk with their living family or other family members about being smart about that up front? I'll give that to either Meredith, if you'd like to start, and then Evelyn.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that we see quite often, especially in the Black community, and I can speak to my own family for that. And a lot of times when someone passes away, it just leads to a fight. And before I even started practicing estate planning, I just honestly thought that that's what happened when people passed away, was that you fought. But there's a better way. There's a better way. You can have these simple conversations where you just ask your parents or your grandparents, like, hey, what do you want to have happen to your property after you're no longer with us? Or do you want it to go to your grandkids? How do you see that happening? How do you want it to go to your descendants or your children? How do you want that structured? Let's get that down in writing, because if you don't have it down in writing, it will lead to that fighting. And people will show their true colors when it comes time for a funeral and when someone has died and it comes down to the probate process. And people will fight over these absolute smallest thing. Either they can fight over a lampshade. So we want to make sure that when it comes to your property, you have it written down. And again, you invest in a professional to do it for you. But to go back to the beginning of your question, it's really just to start those conversations, have those dialogues, because there's two things guaranteed in life. It's death and taxes. So we're all going to die. And so we need to make a plan for it. And so what I like to do is just make a plan for the expected and unexpected events. So this falls into that expected category. So let's make it easier for the people that we leave behind so we're not a burden to them. And so that's what I would say. Just have those conversations.
And Greg has a quote he drops a lot about the number of millionaires made through real estate ownership, right? It's a real thing. It's in the 90s, something percentage like that, of millionaires are created through the ownership of property.
So they did a study on self-made millionaires in America, and they found that 90% of self-made millionaires did it through real estate. And so, again, I think I was joking with Anthony earlier, but like, you know, people think, oh, it's music, I gotta write a book, I gotta have a business, but when statistically, those folks who are becoming millionaires are doing it the way that we're doing it. And so it's important to lean in.
Perfect. And the reason I asked that question is because the millionaires got their start with the ownership of property, but then when you talk about multimillionaires multiplying, tripling, it's about tax avoidance, which is legal, versus tax evasion, which is illegal, okay? Tax avoidance and strategy is what we're talking about here. This is 100% part of tax avoidance.
Right,
Evelyn?
that's what we're doing here is tax avoidance, not evasion. I wanted to comment on this topic of elders and planning for real estate. So there are a number of documents and strategies that can be very effective when people are getting older. And some of them are probably, you know, wills, trusts. I know people kind of think of that first. There are other things that you want to think about as well, though. Like as people get older, I just had my father pass earlier this year, and he had dementia. And in the last year of his life, his dementia became very severe to the point where he could not have conducted his own business anymore. So planning before things like that happen, like planning while people are still competent, is really important. So if you have elderly family members who own real estate, one of the things you can start thinking about is putting in place power of attorneys, you know, so that you are actually appointing specific people that they trust to handle their property. You can do this for their assets. You can also do this specifically for real property. And in most jurisdictions, there are very specific statutory requirements for how that power of attorney needs to look in order for you to record things in land records. So in order for you to record deeds and transfer real property. So I can't tell you how often I have situations where somebody is coming to me wanting to sell mom's house. Mom is in a nursing home. She's no longer competent, but she did this power of attorney 5 years ago so that this property could be handled. Well, it's not a proper power of attorney for transfer of real property. So it's not something that we're able to use for that transaction. So again, just really important that you don't just pull something off the internet or go to LegalZoom. Like you need to talk to a professional, because in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, different power of attorney in each of those jurisdictions is needed for recording. So just for example, if you did it in DC, that DC POA is not going to work in Maryland and vice versa. So very important that you just talk to a professional about that. There are other things that you can do too outside of the power of attorney. The power of attorney is kind of always a great idea as people are getting older, because you just never know, you know, like, I mean, I know for my father, like overnight, all of a sudden he had a stroke and then he had dementia, you know? So it's smart to really just plan for these things when people get older. But another thing you can do is you can start adding people to title as a way of estate planning. So let's say I'm getting older. I know that I want this particular house to go to my son. I could just add him to title as a joint tenant. And when I pass away, he will automatically be the sole owner of that property just by operation of law. No probating my estate, no additional paperwork. That's it. So, and that's a really inexpensive deed in most jurisdictions. So literally under $500 to do something like that in most jurisdictions. So yeah, very quick and dirty way to just kind of, you know, plan for things like that.
So to recap some of the high level things they've shared already, have a plan early, have a discussion early, get it in writing early, power of attorney as a backup that you should just have in general. And talking with those elder family members early about what they want. And I think there's a fear, which our keynote speaker will be talking with us about later, that a lot of folks have had around having money conversations, that we gotta get over, right? And he's gonna talk about strategies, but the more informed you are and the more informed you can be about specific suggestions, the better those conversations go. So ladies, thank you a lot. I wanted to give you one more chance. If there was anything in terms of a wrap up, final thought, nugget, something actionable that people could take away from here, and how to find you. Meredith, you wanna go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Harrison, for having me. I'm happy to speak about all of this. I would say start having those conversations with people and start making plans and writing things down about what you want to have happen to your property. You invested a lot to get your property and become a homeowner, so it's time to protect it. You can contact me either by email at meredith@thehilllawgroup.com. You can also visit my website. It's just thehilllawgroup.com, or on social media at Hill Law Group. So you get the gist, Hill Law Group. So that's how you can reach me. And I would love to sit down and chat with you to protect our properties.
Love it. Thank you. Evelyn, any final thoughts, and how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you, Harrison. Thank you for having me today. And Coalition, thank you so much. Just happy to be here, and hopefully you guys feel empowered from today's conversation and you walk away thinking that you can exert some control over your assets and your real estate. I guess my final thought would be, you don't have to remember all the details or even know all the details of what we're kind of brushing the surface on today. But I think the real takeaway is just talk to professionals and know that there are real options for planning in the future. I can be found on Instagram at smartevelynjd, and my website is smartsettlements.com.
Thank you. And I will just point out, we don't just bring people up here that are like nice or that cut us checks. We do like people cutting us checks. I'm working directly with both of them. Like Meredith both helped my wife and I get our plan together because now we have a son. She's gonna help my mom soon if my mom ever calls you back. And Evelyn's helping me with, has helped us with multiple transactions now too. So like when we refer coalition-wise, it's like not just disconnected. It's people we're actually eating with, working with, and experiencing with you. So thank you both for helping me along my journey. Thank you for helping our team and supporting us. And thank you for everything you shared today. Everybody give it up for them real quick. Questions. And then I'm going to do one more thing and ask you ladies if you can give me a few more minutes up here to open it up for Q&A. But I talk a lot in front of people, and I like to try to do things to bring the energy back a little bit. And all of us in leadership kind of grew up in the church tradition. So I'm going to try a little call and response, and I'm going to ask you to work with me real quick. I'm going to say my ownership, and I want you to say matters. So when I say my ownership, I want you to say matters. And then after that, I'm going to say my ownership is, and I want you to say power. So let's try it. So first off, my ownership is. My ownership is. Excellent. Thank y'all. Got the juices flowing a little bit. Was there anyone that had questions? We know this is a deep topic. Don't be shy. If anyone had any questions for either of the ladies while they're up here, we'll give it a couple minutes, please. And sorry, just yell.
So her question was that she's heard that if you're married and you want to buy multiple properties, that one person buys one property and the other person buys the other property because it looks different on your credit score. Properties on your credit score. I have not heard that. I would actually advise against doing that because you want to make sure that you have your spouse, if you pass away, that your spouse can still be on the deed and still has ownership of the property. And so generally with married couples, you will buy it as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. And that term may change depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, but that's generally what it is. So what it means, if you were to die, then your husband would automatically still remain on the property, and you don't have to go through that probate process that Evelyn talked about and get it retitled, because that's a pain. Yeah.
Can I add something to that? Because I think I know what you're talking about. I don't know about this credit score thing that you're mentioning, but I do know of this as a strategy of purchasing, like married couples purchasing property individually. And there are reasons to do that. So like, for example, in Maryland and also in DC, there are first-time homebuyer programs. If you buy as a married couple, you guys have both extinguished your opportunities to do that first-time homebuyer program. But if you bought separately, you could both, your husband could buy a house and you could buy a house where you guys both use that program. And then what I would suggest you do is after you purchase, you then add the spouse to title so that you get that right of survivorship that Meredith was just talking about.
He buys one house, then taxes debt to equal ratio. If we decide we need $1 billion house and I buy that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. She was saying it affects debt to income ratio if nobody else heard that.
I was gonna say, and Matt, lender wise, I don't know if we have a lender in the room, if that was something to clarify as well. So if there's more of those questions, he can chime in. The next question, thank you so much. Was that all? We'll go here and then Namdi after, young lady up front. And please say your name and we'll repeat your question.
So, is a will an edit to a deed? So if someone didn't get the opportunity to deed or add joint tenant to the deed, can the will, can you will it to someone? Will that make the same purpose?
So I can repeat the question so it's helpful.
Yeah.
She asked, is a will an edit to a deed? Is a will an edit to a deed?
For me to answer. Okay, so I'll start. I'll let you add in too. So your will is not going to make you avoid probate. Okay, so drafting a deed properly and adding other co-tenants with right of survivorship will erase the need to probate an estate in order to have the property flow to those co-tenants. But if you don't, let's say you don't do any kind of estate planning through your deed work and you prepare a will, through the probate process, your estate will be administered according to the will. Okay, so wills don't avoid probate, but it does estate plan. Okay, now if you wanted to avoid probate, a mechanism that you might want to think about is a trust. And Meredith can probably speak more to that. You could take title in a trust.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, probate is that court-administered process where you take a will to the court, it's validated, hopefully it's validated, and the judge follows the instructions that you have in your will. It can be a very long process. It can be a very annoying process, and it just extends the grieving period. And so what we like to do is try to have plans for you to avoid that process. So that's why Evelyn was talking about probate avoidance, because you can also lose a lot of money within probate because there's a lot of fees that go along to it with it because probate is expensive. And so one way you can do it is with the deed beforehand. But if you did not have a chance to do the deed and you have the will, then yes, the will would be a great way to pass on that property. To avoid probate, however, altogether and still pass on property, I would highly recommend a trust and putting that property into a trust. And the trust would be the one that's on the deed instead of your actual name. And then the trust is administered privately. So you don't have to go to court with a trust, and you administer it either yourself or by an attorney who's licensed and capable of doing that. That way, you have it written in your trust what you want to have happen. So if you want to keep the trust as the owner of the property on the deed and you just have your family still reside in it for X amount of years, you can have that. If you want to have the property be sold after you pass away and that money be put into your estate and then that money be given to your alma mater, you can do that as well through a trust. You have a lot of flexibility with a trust and you really have a lot of control. I could sit here for days and talk about my love of trust, but yeah, trust is a really great way to avoid probate.
And just in order, I'll come back to you after. Is that okay? Can I say that? Thank you. Namdi, and I'll repeat it.
Sorry, actually, my question was the trust. It's totally more for local trust
Irrevocable. So the question was, could you talk about the pros and cons of a revocable trust versus an irrevocable trust, Meredith?
Sure. So a lot of the trusts that we create are revocable trust, also known as a living trust. We like this trust because you can take properties in and out of the trust. You can add any assets in and out of the trust as long as you're alive. After you pass away, then it becomes irrevocable, meaning it becomes permanent. And whatever is in there is in there. So I like to, for most circumstances, I recommend having a revocable trust instead of an irrevocable trust, because you have that flexibility and you have control over what happens within the trust and within your lifetime. There are, it's a bigger investment with a revocable trust rather than a will. But it is a great way to have some tax planning, again, have property in and out of the trust, have that control beyond the grave. It's a great way to plan for your minor children and giving them assets in different ages and stages of their lives instead of just all at once. And so I'm kind of going on a tangent with revocable trust, but I would say for most purposes, revocable trust is the way that you want to go.
And if I may real quick, Evelyn, chime in. Some of the highest net worth individuals we help on the transaction side are doing everything through that trust. It's a tool of the wealthy. And we talk about building wealth together, so understand that's a really important thing to know.
Yeah, and so I think flexibility, as Meredith said, is the big thing with a revocable trust. And because you can pretty much do almost anything that you could do as an individual with your living trust. And one of the important things to think about, I hit on this at the very beginning, is the financing that you're going to be doing. Oftentimes with an irrevocable trust, you're not going to be able to have access to as much financing as you would with a revocable trust. So most lenders, if you're getting a loan on your property, if you wanted to refinance, get money out, something like that, they're going to want to see that your trust is a revocable trust.
Thank you. And wait, afterwards, they'll pause for a second. Ma'am, say your name and repeat.
Quick. So with the living trust, if you own the property that's can you place it in there? Does it matter?
Yes, you can. You can place it in there.
Can you repeat her question real quick? Repeat her question.
If you have a property that still has a mortgage on it, can it go into a trust?
Yes, you can still do that. And it's usually a non-taxable transfer to transfer from an individual to a trust also. So it's a very good vehicle for owning real property.
And let's do two more. And I want to queue up Catherine and Benji. If you wouldn't mind coming back up after these two, because they're offering a couple questions there, but we'll keep rolling. The gentleman over here, please say your name and repeat your question.
How you doing on air time? So you mentioned earlier that it can be expensive to transfer a title over to a company's name. When you say expensive, are you talking about like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars? You kind of combine.
So cost to transfer titles from a person to a company, range of cost.
So in the District of Columbia, it would be 2.9% of the assessed value for your property.
So y'all heard that, 2.9% of the assessed. Now there's a difference between assessed value and market value, what it sells for.
There is,
so
yes.
that's
so
what you pay taxes on.
Right, this is from the tax office. So whatever the assessed value is with the tax office, it would be 2.9% of that. Yeah.
Keep that in mind. Dan, and then I'm going to come back to the other side.
Dan Wheeler.
I got over there.
So, hey, Evelyn.
Hey.
It sounds like a good, I guess, hack could be just putting people's name on the deed for a couple $100.
It's a great idea. Yeah, it is.
I'm thinking of my mom, and I'm like, I've been telling her since 2016, and she's like, I'm going to do it. She ain't did it yet. So
yes.
I'm even like, yo, I'll pay for it. And she's like, no, I'll take care of it. She still ain't did it yet. So it sounds like I could just keep, like, my whole family, like, I could put my son on my deed and then his grandson on the deed.
It's a great idea. You know, my older brother, he's my half brother. We have different moms. His mom's getting older. I just recently made sure that he's his mother's only child. So he would be the sole heir to all of her assets. But who wants to have to go through probate, you know? So what I had him do last year was make sure that he was added to title as a joint tenant on her property in Georgia. So, yeah.
And thank you. I saw 3 questions on this side. Catherine and Benji, if you wouldn't mind coming up to get ready. We're going to do those 3 questions, and then we'll pivot to a few questions for Catherine and Benji. And then afterwards, we're going to do the quick break, and they will be here to answer all of them. And you got your little notepads, and we're going to do a little bit of a golden nugget, what you thought of, what you heard, what you learned later to share. So young lady in the green, please.
Hi, my name is Teresa. So I just had a quick question because I was actually, my mom passed a few months ago. She did have a will, but her ex-husband or her husband died was on the deed. So we're going through probate now. With the trust, that was something that surprisingly a lady at the court suggested to me. We were buying property with the sale of her home. So my question to you is, with trust, I know we're talking about real estate, but can you kind of go into depth about, well, not in depth, but talk about what other things can go into a trust? Because I think a lot of times people are confused as to what that does and how it can help their family long term.
Yeah, so you can you can put everything pretty much that you own into a trust. So the major thing that we talk about first is your property, because that is a major asset that you have. You can retitle your bank accounts into the name of your trust so that when you pass away, your successor trustee that you've named can go in and still manage your affairs. I would also recommend naming your trust as the beneficiary of your retirement accounts and your life insurance policies. That way, when you pass away, those proceeds will flow straight to the trust and they'll be there. And then you will have a set of instructions listed in the trust that states what you want to have happen with that money. A lot of times I've seen people that put their minor children as their beneficiaries on their life insurance policies and retirement accounts. I do not recommend doing that because if you do that, they won't be able to access that money until they're 18. And I'm sure that if you were to pass away and they're still minors, you still want them to be able to be taken care of, have their health, maintenance, education, and support taken care of. And the best way to do that is through having it in a trust. Additionally, with having your minor children on your life as a beneficiary on your life insurance and retirement plans, is they get it all at once. So if you have a $2 million life insurance policy and your child gets it at 18, they're getting $2 million at the age of 18. Do you trust your 18-year-old child with $2 million? No. I mean, I'm just thinking about myself. If I got $2 million at 18, it would have been gone by 19. So if you have a minor child, I strongly recommend getting a trust so you can have instructions on how you want that money to flow to them, and you can really just make it as long as possible, or you can cut it off once they're 25 or 30, whatever. You can make a lot of stipulations. So you can put to answer your question, you can put anything in trust, and I love trust.
Such a good question. Thank you. I had 2 more questions on that side on this will and trust, and I can see this as a hot topic. So if you had other questions and we didn't get to you, please write them down, and at break, come up and ask them, all right? So don't want to get the question unanswered. I believe young lady in the blue had something.
I had a question about pros, cons, if you're buying, you already have property, you're buying additional property, getting your loan for your trust from the very beginning versus completing the purchase and then putting it into
So the question was around pros and cons of when you purchase your property, doing it in your name or doing it in a trust from the beginning, right? That's the question.
So I would say if you're able to take title in the trust to begin with, you're going to minimize costs because you're not going to have to do a transfer after you've already taken title individually. So you can avoid the cost of that deed transfer. However, this is going to be a question that you want to go over with your lender, because some lenders, I'd say maybe 70% of lenders have no issue lending to a revocable trust. There are some lenders who their loan program is not going to allow you to use their financing if you own the property in a trust. So in those situations, like when you own it in a revocable trust, we can still work around that. We often will transfer out of the trust, do the transaction, and then transfer right back into the trust thereafter. But there is cost associated with doing that. So if you can avoid the additional transfers, you can do that. But I would say definitely talk to your lender about whether they can lend to a trust. So the minute I see, sometimes we have a sales contract come in, it's an individual who's purchasing, and then we get an addendum that says, oh, we changed our mind, we're going to put it into our trust. And the first thing I say is, have you advised your lender that you're going to be using a trust? Are they able to loan to the trust? So I'd say just make sure that you've checked on that.
And that's something we can get Matt to dig in a little bit more later if he'd like to, but be clear that there are multiple people involved with all your transactions. There's the tax and legal preferential part, but the person who's actually giving you the money is going to set the rules too. So a lot of times with lower down payment, more cash beneficial to you products, they're going to be a little bit more strict about how that title is taken, and you just have to have a plan up front. I believe, thank you so much for that question. Young lady in the front.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to ask a practical question. How much money are we talking about that this investment will cost?
For what?
Trust, will, probate. I'm hearing all of these things are affecting your pocket, but I just wanted to know if you have any ranges on how much it will.
She said, get to the money. Show me how much it's going to cost.
What was your name again? I like you. I like you. Okay, so trust preparation, I'll let you speak on of what you charge or where that kind of starts. I can tell you for probate, I actually used to do probate work. So I would say if you are hiring counsel to open probate, you're probably looking at least $5,000 retainer, depending on how complex the estate actually is. And that's just kind of for starters. For deed preparation, you're probably looking at starting range of around $500 to $600. And then of course, transfer and recordation taxes, that is, goes on top of that.
Yeah, that's on point. And then for the trust preparations, I would say it starts around $5,000, $5,500 and goes from there depending on the complexity of it. And again, you're investing in on the front end because like Evelyn just said, for probate, you're probably starting off with a $5,000 retainer. And believe me, they will ask for more money. A lot of estate planning and administration attorneys, they make most of their money on probate cases. Because it costs so much more money. And so that, to answer your question, that's the general range.
Because our lovely legal professionals are often paid for their time and on an hourly basis. So the more complicated, the less prepared to bring that all back around. The more you have a plan and conversation up front and can make that investment, it will literally save you thousands of dollars on the back end because of time if stuff is really messy.
Yeah. If I can add just one thing also.
Oh. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me? Okay. If I can add just one thing. The more complicated your family structure is, the more important it is that you think about these things too. I just want to point that out. So like, for example, let's say you have a blended family, like, two spouses with children from previous marriages. Maybe there are certain family members that you don't want to get things or family members that you definitely do want to get things in larger proportions and that kind of thing. As soon as things become more complicated like that, I think it's even more important that you kind of start planning for things like this, because if you die intestate, which is without a will, without any like estate planning, there is a progression just by operation of law of what will happen to your assets. So if you're deviating from that, if your wishes deviate from that, it is that much more important that you plan for it.
And just one more thing, if you own property in multiple jurisdictions, so multiple states, and you don't have a will, or you just have a will and you go through that probate process, you're gonna have to go through probate in each one of those states where your property is located. So you're paying multiple attorneys as opposed to just paying for the trust up front. Just think about that.
And
I love trust, thank you.
And I will invite at this time, if there were questions for Catherine or Benji about the organizing and construction, get those ready, but it seemed like there were a few more will, trust, and legal questions, so we can stick with those. But if there were questions for our other panelists, get them ready and go. Who are you? So Will also asked, how much is it going to cost to have you come help me? Could you please pass her one of the mics?
Thank you. Yeah, so most of my clients, I'm doing their entire home. And when I say entire home, I mean absolutely everything from the bottle that's on the table. So those clients start at $3,600. For clients that I'm doing more like DIY or, you know, less than 1,400 square feet, we're starting at $1,500. Yep.
I also have a question for you as well.
Sure.
How for a closet, like my husband and I, we've been trying to get estimates on having our closet done. Do you just organize the closet, or can you like help redesign the closet?
Yeah, absolutely.
A real quick question on scope of service, asking specifically about a closet. Can you just tell her what to do, or can you help her do it too? Is that the right question?
Or like there are companies that will do your closet.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, like, do you organize or do you purchase?
Yeah, so locally there's California Closets, the Container Store, obviously the Alpha Systems. I do have a partnership with the Container Store, so whatever discounts that I have with them, I relay that to the client, of course. But I definitely can do design, aesthetics, and sometimes I just get on the call. There's usually like as a liaison to talk and say, hey, you know, I've decluttered with them. This is what they're looking for, and I would be like in the room, but I wouldn't be the designer per se. Yep.
You awake now, right?
Sorry. No, I didn't.
Oh, I thought he did. I looked at him.
No,
He's like, I can build you the closet.
Sorry, he kept looking at me, asking. So, yeah. So I guess you're asking me like how much would it cost to construct a closet? But it's what it is. So generally, it's gonna be how much you want to customize it. If you want just a general closet, I'm gonna probably tell you to go to California Closets. If we're building it for you, it's going to be to spec of individual, like, oh, she needs for 3/4 for her dresses, shoes, racks, and so forth, and how much you're really going to customize for that. I would say that we start off on a 48-inch wide closet. You're probably looking at least $2,000 for there and going up, but that is for developing it exactly for your shoes, your purses, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's almost always for ladies because I've never done one for a dude.
You built the closet that is in my house right now, and I'm happy with it. It was awesome. More questions for no?
Yes. Hi, this is Tommy. For those of us that may have multiple businesses, this question is probably what are the benefits? I'm assuming, based on like my personal research, there's trust. You can open more than one trust, correct?
Yes.
So, from a multi-business perspective, what are some of the benefits of having trust own all the businesses? From a legal standpoint, and I'm going to take work. And anonymity, and what's the other thing? The legal shield, the benefits of having some sort of protection in terms of liability. We can talk a little bit about that. And what are also like best practices? For instance, trust can hold 10 companies.
Mm-hmm.
5 companies.
So yeah, so that was a lot, but it was good. It was good a lot. So he was asking about if you have multiple businesses, what is the benefit of having a trust own the businesses? Is that what you were asking? So what I do in that situation, I don't have the trust own the business. Like they're not, if you go to like DC government, they're not the owner of the business. What I would do is I assign membership interest for the trust to have, so that once you pass away, again, that successor trustee or whoever you name can come in and still manage the business according to how you want it. And this is, of course, assuming that your business is legal or properly set up with whatever government or state that you're in. Because if it is not legally set up, if you're not like an LLC, for example, then you are opening the door for that personal liability. And if someone were to sue you, they could access your personal assets and your business assets. So when you have a business, Always make sure that your business is separate. You're keeping your money separate. We don't want any commingled funds. Yeah. Because prior to becoming an estate attorney, I did a lot of litigation and I was in court a lot. And people like to fight a lot and sue a lot. So we want to make sure that we are insulating and protecting your personal assets and creating that business structure. And then if you have a trust, then assigning the membership ownership to the LLC. I think I said that right. My brain is a little fried right now, but we can talk afterwards if you want to talk more specifics.
Yeah, that was multi-pronged, and I got to apologize to the left side here because I've been looking, so I'm going to give my last few questions for this session to this side. And remember, write them down. They're going to be here hanging out. You can and should come up and ask more questions later. Gentleman in the black, please.
Hi, I'm Chris. Let's say I want to take all of the advice that I've been given so far. It sounds like I need to talk to anywhere from 4 to 10 different people. Can you guys talk about the type of team I need to get together to, let's say I bought my property, I want to start businesses, make sure I'm protected, organized, and like tell me about the type of team I need to assemble to know my bases are covered.
So he asked about his team. In addition to Coalition, who put this all together, the other would anyone like to talk briefly about the team?
I would say that you work with your coalition agent and they will direct you on who you need to talk to next is actually what I would say. One thing that we haven't touched on that deeply yet is just company ownership of real property. I know we kind of talked about how it gets taxed if you don't take title initially in that company name. But one very effective strategy for like people who are developers or just like rental property owners is that they will own properties in multiple LLCs. And you do that in order to limit your own personal liability. So that is something that at Smart we can help you with. That's something I'm sure Coalition would probably advise you to do if you're buying property like that as well. So yeah, I'd say speak to Coalition and they can tell you what you're gonna need based on what you're actually doing.
Well, not to be trite or just sell, the fact that the ownership group and leadership group has done a lot of this, and we use these people directly, talk about your plan, we'll connect you with who, but you got 4 to start right here. Great question. Who's next on this side?
For Benji. So you spoke earlier about in bathrooms, subway tile being very popular. Also, I've seen grout lines in bathrooms and in kitchens being very popular, but I have a short-term rental, and I'm in there constantly scrubbing with a brush, trying to keep those grout lines clean. Is there any way that you suggest to preserve that longevity with the grout, or is that possible?
Tactical question about subway tile in his rental property and grout and maintenance.
First question is, what color is it? White. That's right. It's not, don't. Like, white grout will always, it's white. It's going to show every flaw every time. You cannot seal it, do anything to it well enough. I actually say if it's a short-term rental that you have, your best investment would be to regrout it in a darker color so that you're not. Because right now you're fighting a battle that we cannot win. But no.
I said silicone caulk as another item to put on top of it, but why?
No, silicone caulk is for where you have two walls come together, or the tubs. So that's not gonna stop it from becoming dirty. Even silicone caulk, after so often, probably every 2 years, needs to be cut out and recaulked. Caulk is not a permanent solution.
Versus them touching, is there any negative parts of tiles touching and not having grout? That's what he was asking.
Is this in the shower? Yeah, so no, grout is required. So people try to not do grout. Grout also helps tiles to not move and to provide some cracking. So there's people who try to not do grout. It doesn't really work well. So we won't actually do it because we don't want the call back. But so I wouldn't advise it.
Hi, I have a 2-part question. One, what are some key things to look for when picking a general contractor? And 2, when you are setting up that contract, what are some key things as far as how that breakdown should be, like the cost of the labor?
So 2 questions about how you pick a contractor, and then what should you look for in the contract with said contractor with breaking down detail.
I would say, A, do not just get one contractor, one quote. Get several, but before you even get a quote, get a good list of what you want to have done and hand that out to each person so that you're getting back an apples to apples comparison. There's a lot of times where I see people will come to me and I'll give them a quote for something and they will even show me what another contractor gave them. I'm like, you're not actually comparing apples to apples. Get referrals. If you want to talk to some other people that have worked for them, definitely get references of work for that. So a big reason I work with Coalition is that I have a long-standing history of I work with this person, this person, this person. I can then easily say, hey, you can talk to these several realtors, and that is a big help. But definitely a history of workmanship is definitely very big in your contract. Make sure that the terms are comfortable for you. As the client, you run the show. I'm going to present you my contract. You might have some edits of how you want things to work and to make that work and for you to be comfortable. So a lot of it, you have to remember, it is your money and you are making the decision. I present my contracts how I would like them to do. People make small edits, but you have to make sure you're comfortable. The contractor does not run your project.
I had a question similar to Benji. Actually, sorry, 2 parts. One is, what renovation project can you do in your home that will build the most equity, right? So not what I like, is what I care, white or girl, whatever, but what actually is going to add equity to the home. That's my first question. And the second question, DC has a lot of 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom homes. It's just not enough, and I know a lot of us are adding bathrooms, adding rooms. I just want to see if you had any tips or cautions for folks that are adding rooms or actual spaces in their home.
So most impactful renovations and advice on people making additions in terms of rooms to the house.
For most impactful, I would say if you were to walk into your home yourself, which rooms would you look at and go, ooh, this one needs to be fixed? It's really going to depend upon home. And also in DC, I'd say kitchens a little bit more so than bathrooms, because when you walk into homes, people have now opened them up a lot. So if you have an opened up home with a not nice kitchen, they've already made a judgment on your home before they even get to see the bathrooms. So that's a big part of it there. The second part of your question was for bedrooms. People are trying to chop rooms up as small as possible to get more bedrooms in there. A big thing I'm seeing is, are these rooms big enough to fit a queen size bed? That's the biggest thing, is that and egress windows. People want to make a bedroom, but is it legally a bedroom, and what other complications can that cause down the line? Egress window means it is an access point to exit the building. Each room should have 2 egress points, typically a door and a window. It can be 2 doors, but at least has to be 2 entry points, 2.7 square feet, which is big enough for a firefighter to enter and exit the building with his tank on his back. 2 doors, yes. But most people don't want, and so 2 doors to go outside of that room. It cannot be from one bedroom to another bedroom.
Cool.
Well, this question is, thank you, panel, has been fantastic. I'm actually going to ask Harrison to kind of tag along on that equity piece. From your realtor perspective, what can a client do to build the most equity? Benji's going to do it. Where do you point your client and say, what can you do in this house so I can get the most amount of money back?
Siri got me too. Thank you, Siri. So our market's shifting a little bit, right? Before, I would talk more about the shinier first impression things, which are very important. But I love that Benji out the gate talked about HVAC. the comfort in your house. It is hot as hell. It's an uncomfortable city. It's a cold city in the winter. You have to have an upgraded and quality HVAC. The next thing I think is electrical system, especially as people are looking for more electric cars. There's going to be more higher drain electric appliances. Doing something called a heavy up, which is where you take the amps in the house from 80 or 100 up to 200. It's something that's not as sexy, but going to be super functional down the line. And the last I'll say is pipes, the boring stuff. In my first house, Benji helped me out. One of those old cast iron cracked pipes that their excrement would go down from time to time. Had a terrible, disgusting. I didn't like it. I'd have to spend a couple grand on it, but I did it once. That is now my highest and best performing investment property. I've never had to go back and touch those pipes later. Don't put shiny stuff on top if you have not looked at and addressed the stuff behind the scenes. So I'd say in order of importance, you have to think about if you have older stuff behind the scenes, address it. This is where a good inspector is going to help us and help you understand what is imminent need, what needs to be monitored, what can wait. If they give you something that's imminent need, do that first, and then work on a cost-effective renovation and organization plan for the stuff on top later. HVAC, electrical, plumbing, specifically those old galvanized pipes. And the last thing I would say is windows and doors. Think about your entry points to the home. Jason, who's on our team, I want to see Jason where he is, helps us out with getting homes ready and sometimes getting windows in place. They are not cheap, but from a HVAC efficiency standpoint, investing in windows that open and close and are solid and close the envelope of your house are the other thing. So not as sexy, not as exciting, but it's important to think about. And then, wait, I don't know if Keith or Donna, okay.
Can you talk about the things that people need to do about permits and things like that, where they can get in a lot of trouble if they don't?
Great question. So,
Multi-family renovations and things like that.
So Donna is the listing manager on our team and the queen of compliance to make sure that we do things right. Her question was around permits and how we need to think about or talk about permits for work done in your home. Benji?
Being in my existence. So permits are required when you're making certain changes to your homes, depending upon jurisdiction and the difficulty to get them. Some require drawings, some require just notifying the city. So permits are required for various things. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small, and sometimes it's just filing paperwork online, and sometimes it is full-blown, I need architectural plans and so forth. So that's also something that's going to be very case-specific. And the permit process for the bigger things is really to make sure that people are not making changes that can hurt the home, being unsafe. Like, people want to move walls, but do not know what walls can be moved and how to do so. It's very common to see them in, yes, it may still be standing, but you don't want to stand underneath it. So to answer the question is, yes, they are required. You have to, they're very case specific about what you need for which situation.
If I'm doing a full gut renovations in the property, 100 to 200K worth, how much do permits cost?
Right now, we are doing one in Northeast. It's not even a full gut, but my structural and permit costs are $25,000.
And that structural permit is for?
The structural is to make a structural repair to the house and also to modify some load-bearing walls within it. So it's not just, so when people think about it, it is getting an architect to draw up the plans. I need a structural engineer to certify them that is correct. And then there are the different fees for the different permits. So I have paid close to almost $50,000 for permits and fees for a single house.
And that's for context. How long does it take to get permits in DC?
The question was, how long does it take to get permits for a total flip in DC?
You don't like me today. It can take up to 6 months, possibly more sometimes. So it is. So people think that they watch Flip My House. Please do not think that is reality. None of that. It is the worst influence upon people think that, I can do this. Even just planning. People think that if I go to your house and I talk to you for 1 hour, we've discussed enough to renovate your house. It should typically take, if we're doing a gut renovation to a house, I'm probably going to meet with my clients at least 4 to 5 times and speak to them for 2, possibly 3 hours, because there are so many details And if you're not planning before, you'll be planning during. And that planning during will always cost you more, because that means I got to move a wall back for this or for that. Or you wanted the trash can here. Or you wanted this there. All of those details matter. And it takes a long time to plan all that out.
Can I say something real quick? You are absolutely right, but I also want to acknowledge myself, Ronald, right here. Like, it is scary and it can take a long time, but if you're aggressive, you can do it in a short amount of time. So I just don't want to scare you all and think, oh, I have to take a 3-year strategy. Because how long did it take you to renovate your fixer-upper?
I bought it in February and they finished around May to June.
He said he went from February to May for a renovation project of his own.
So it is possible to get it done faster. I know we kind of debate now. But
No, not a debate. No. No, the whole spectrum of what it can take, and again, there's a different fees and different levels of jobs you do too. If we're talking, what we were just talking about was a more complete job, moving stuff that's safety, structural, mechanical.
No, it can move faster, but if anyone's worked with DCRA and other different government agencies, once you start, they dictate the pace. And as a contractor, my ability to say, hey, move fast doesn't work. You give it to them, you ask them, pretty please, are you done? And if you know, like I will say, I've worked with some developers who they were very strategic in what they're going to change. They're only going to change certain things to make sure that they can get through the project faster. When I'm seeing people who want to really gut renovate a home because it's going to be their home forever, and these are bigger, larger projects, sometimes those things are unavoidable.
And if you got somebody telling you they can do it cheap and fast, Spidey sense should be tingling, right? Because you're going to pay on one side or the other. And this is, again, the important part of this, to bring it back to even the legal point. Evelyn and Meredith don't really care what your permits say when they're closing it. That's not their job. So in terms of due diligence, that's where having the team we talked about before is super important. So you have informed eyes looking at what's happening, what needs to happen, and can help you prioritize and budget it properly. And I'm sorry, in the interest of time, we do have to wrap this one up. Let's give a big round of applause for these panelists.